So a quick word of welcome from me. As you can see, my name's Alison Bull. I'm a partner, mediator, children arbitrator, collaborative practitioner and lawyer with UK national law firm Mills & Reeve. I'd just like to thank you all for joining us today on behalf of all of us at Mills & Reeve, and in particular from our National Family and Children team who work with families and children based in England and Wales and overseas. And I'm so excited to welcome all of you listening, and especially our internationally based wonderful panelists and chair, with whom I would never have connected but for COVID and the book project, which Michael will tell you about in a moment. So I do really feel that there have been some positives to come out of the last very challenging 18 months. So just to mention that if you have any questions that you would like to put to any of the panelists, please use the Q&A function. You can either contribute those questions anonymously, or please put your name if you would like us to come back to you specifically afterwards. And then it just leaves me to introduce the hugely experienced and inspiring Michael Lang, who is our chair for this event. And Michael is based in Florida, although most importantly for the Brits amongst us, he has a strong connection with Yorkshire. He's been a practicing mediator since the late 70s. He's created graduate programs in conflict resolution, trained mediators, and written numerous articles and several books. I'm so pleased he's agreed to chair today, and I'll hand over to him now to introduce the other panelists and to start the conversation that we'll have over the next hour or so. We may run over a little bit, but we'll try to keep it to just over an hour. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison. That's a very kind introduction. And I'm grateful to Mills & Reeve for for hosting, for organizing, for managing the tech support, and making this webinar really possible. This is not the first one that some of us have done, thanks to our friends and colleagues at Mills & Reeve, and we're indebted to them. The group of us here today are part of a project, a book project, and this is the book. It's called Family Conflict During a Pandemic, Stories of Struggle and Hope. The book is a collection of pieces from 93 contributors from throughout the world. People who have shared stories, ideas, experiences, a couple of poems, and a couple of illustrations as well. All of us hold together to do this. We have, among the 93 contributors, I should say, and this panel is a representation of that, there are 17 countries represented and 9 languages, which is an astonishing achievement made possible because we can today generally pretty easily communicate with one another. So we all came together to contribute to this book because we recognize that family conflict was only going to get worse, more intense, more challenging, more frustrating as a result of conditions from of the pandemic, with people having to work from home, people being unemployed or underemployed, children being homeschooled, tensions of families living in such close quarters with one another, literally tripping over one another. And so the idea behind this book is to give back, offer some ideas, some stories that will be uplifting and instructive at the same time. I want to make one more note about it, and then we're going to get to our group. All of the proceeds, 100% of whatever proceeds are received from the sale of the book, and it's in both print and digital format, are given directly to not-for-profit organizations that are serving families. We're particularly going to, this year, going to give to one or more organizations that are focused on hunger concerns. And so that's us. Let's begin. I'm going to introduce the panelists and they are going to present in order by alphabet. It was the easiest way to do this, for me at least. And each of them is going to have up to 5 minutes or so to talk about their experience in confronting and addressing conflict with families in their countries. And after that, then we're going to take questions, and there'll be a conversation among the panelists that I'll help facilitate. So first up will be Sarah Ater. Sarah is from Mombasa, Kenya, where she practices mediation. She describes herself as a logophile with a passion for resolving conflicts, and she weaves experiences, her own and those of people in conflict, through stories. And she believes that mediation can promote harmony in families, motivate workers to boost productivity, and support sustainable management of resources. Allison, who will be the second to speak, has already introduced herself, saving me that, and gratefully to have her part of this panel as well. Caitlin Jenkins will speak third, and she's a partner at Mills & Reeve and works with clients to resolve their family law disputes in a variety of ways that suits the client's particular needs. She can act sometimes as a litigator, as a mediator, as a collaborative lawyer, and a financial arbitrator. I would say that's a marvelous collection of skills and talents and resources. Today, however, Caitlin's going to be talking to us with her arbitrator hat on. One other interesting thing about Caitlin is she set up the first family blog in the UK, which is on YouTube under Family Law Vlogger. Our next speaker is Dottoressa Dina Labrozzi, who is a clinical psychologist and family mediator, and she lives and works in Lanciano, which is in East Central Italia. Our next presenter comes from the Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago, Jillian Lewis, who is an educator and a school administrator and also a mediator. And Jillian is a contributor to a lifestyle magazine called My Caribbean Comforts. She holds a Bachelor of Education from the University of West Indies and a Master's of Education in Curriculum, Leadership, and Administration from the University of New Brunswick. And last, here we go, is Marianne Popescu, who is the Executive Director of the Ontario Association for Family Mediation. Marianne is also an accredited mediator, family and elder mediator, and a child protection mediator in private practice. She is a roster mediator for the Office of Independent Police Review Director and a roster mediator for the Ministry of Government and Consumer Affairs. And in response to the global pandemic, she's become a certified online mediator. Great. So we'll begin. Sarah, with you, if you would kindly. Share with us some of your experiences, some of the things you think about in terms of addressing family conflict in Mombasa.
Thank you very much, Michael, and indeed to all my co-panelists. I'd like to share a story about Maureen. Maureen is a fellow mediator, and one time she called me up and she was very upset and feeling very bad about all the things that were happening in her family. And what was quite surprising was that in order to address the issues of conflict, Maureen, who happens to be a very good mediator, was, calling me to tell me that she wasn't going to go for mediation. Was saying that she wants to go to the courts, and she was really just, it wasn't her. Listening to her, it didn't sound like the Maureen that I know. It appeared to be somebody else who was really hurt, in so much pain, and wanting so much to revenge and just to to retaliate. And over time, we had several conversations with Maureen about, the issues that she was going through in her family, and, how she was feeling, and why she was feeling the way that she was feeling. And I think some of the things that, just came up in our conversation, the two of us being mediators, just being able to, talk to one another and find out, ask each other, what is this that we being mediators, and, one of us being in trouble and saying that, no, I'm not going to go for mediation, I want to go for litigation. And just, thinking about, what some of the parties that we handle and we meet, the thoughts that they go through and the spaces that they go through, and, the feelings and the issues that they have. But also interesting was, just in exploring that was, again, Maureen speaking to me in confidence, not wanting this to be known, that, as a mediator, that she was having, issues at home, whereas, she's helping people. So it was all very, so to say, quite muddled up. But over time, as the months went by, then as we continued our, our private discussions in a safe place, then Maureen seemed to, sort of ease and look at things a little bit more, some aspect of peace came back, and, she began to feel like, okay, perhaps this is something that, we could be able to talk through, we could be able to work out, I could be able to get some help. So I think for me, it was just, very eye-opening in the sense that it gave me that first-hand experience, in working with a co-mediator, what sometimes parties go through when they are told to go for mediation. But the other thing that I also appreciated is the fact that, when parties are given space and time, when their pain is acknowledged, when they feel that they are listened to, then they sort of mellow and are more willing to engage in the mediation process. So that's, my little story from Mombasa. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Sarah. And I think we're, as we get to the questions and the conversations, your story will bring up the two of the pieces that I took from it that are really important. One is the value of listening, how important it is that we listen, because it's one of the things that people need so very much, to be able to tell their story to someone who will listen. And secondly, working with a colleague like that, it helps us have a sense of humility about our skills and our work. It's a marvelous story. Thank you. And we'll come back, I'm sure, to be talking more, not just about that story, but about the lessons from it. Thanks, Sarah. Alison, please.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And thank you, Sarah. That was really good to hear. And I suppose I was struck by the different stages of the process that people go through, that our clients go through when they are faced with such difficult circumstances, and how sometimes they need space and time before actually able to contemplate engaging in mediation, which is actually a pretty tough process, I think, for many people. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how we help the children of separating families to be involved in mediation in England and Wales. And I'm hoping that we might hear some more from some others of you later on this subject as well, but we'll see. Because we haven't actually practiced this, so I don't know what everyone else is going to say. So we'll see. But the Family Mediation Council Code of Practice that we operate under here says that all young people and children who are aged 10 and over should be offered the opportunity to have their voices heard directly during mediation if they wish. So to meet with a mediator, to ask questions, to share their views, and to agree with the mediator any messages that they would like the mediator to share with their parents. And the content of that meeting remains confidential unless there are safeguarding concerns. And that's not the case where children involved in court proceedings. It's not confidential, so it's quite different. And in my experience, this really helps parents to focus on how their children are really feeling and to look at it from their children's perspective, and somehow to feel more accountable for their children's feelings and concerns, because they know their children are going to be talking with me as a mediator. But very importantly, I think it enables me to try and connect with and support each of the parents in the process. So to celebrate and build on the good parenting, which is so hard when going through what's an awful process of separation, and to try and help couples and parents to be brave in putting our children's needs first in these circumstances. And in my experience, this connection with children and young people and with their parents can unlock what are seemingly intractable disputes about financial matters and about the arrangements for children. And I can tell you very quickly a story about a couple of unmarried parents. I'm going to call them Teresa and Omar, and they have a daughter, Zainab, who's 15, and a son called Ali, who is 13. And they've been separated already for 6 years, so they're at a different stage perhaps to Maureen, as Sarah talked about. And they have a court order actually that says that both children should live with Teresa and stay with Omar on one night every week and alternate weekends from Friday after school until Monday. And the child maintenance service, which here deals with child maintenance most of the time, dealt with child maintenance for this family too. And Omar has paid the child maintenance throughout. And he now has a new partner and a baby son who's aged 1. And over time, over the last 6 years, there have been some changes to the original arrangements as the children have grown up. And Teresa and Omar have been able to work most of this out with the occasional fallout. So they have really quite different parenting styles, which is very common, of course. But then when Omar met his new partner a couple of years ago, relations between him and Teresa became more difficult. And this coincided with the children reaching an age where they actually wanted to be more independent as well. So Zainab stopped going to her dad's as much, and Ali and his mum were rowing a lot at home, and on occasion Ali would just leave and go to his dad's. The pandemic was the final straw really. Partway through the first lockdown, Ali left home and went to live with his dad. Zainab stayed at her mum's and wouldn't see her dad at all. And as a result, Omar reduced the amount of child maintenance he was paying. And as a consequence of all of this, Teresa and Omar were rowing every time they spoke, and there were lots of angry emails and texts between them. So then Teresa issued a court application herself to try to enforce the court order. And that was when I became involved, because Omar called me for legal advice. And at the time of that initial conversation, I talked to him about the possibility of mediation instead of going to court. And then I talked to Teresa as well. And actually both of them wanted to try mediation, and they wanted their children to be able to have a voice and to be able to speak with me. So I met with each of the parents separately on Zoom first, and then together on Zoom. And we talked through their different views about what their children wanted and needed, or what they thought their children wanted and needed. And we agreed I'd ask Zainab and Ali if they'd like to meet with me, following the process and structure that we have here to use to make sure as much as possible that the experience is going to be safe and a positive one for children. I don't really have time to go into that today, but so then I met with both the children separately and together on Zoom, and at the end of that conversation agreed with each of them what the messages were that they would like me to give to their parents. And Zainab's loyalties lay very much with her mother, and she just didn't feel ready to form a relationship with her dad's new partner. And Ali felt that he wanted to spend more time with his dad and to be able to see his mum and sister, but not to be forced to do so. He felt very strongly about that. So what happened next? Well, to cut a long story short, Teresa and Omar both actually recognised, when I fed back to them, the damage that could be done if they tried to force their children to comply with an order that really no longer met their needs. and also the futility of trying to force a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old to do something they really, really don't want to do. But whilst also I think it was important for them to understand, and they did appreciate, that the responsibility for making the decisions about parenting and setting boundaries was their responsibility. So they agreed they would both encourage Zainab to spend time with her dad each weekend, initially without his new partner. And the arrangements for Ali would be reversed from those that were in the court order. So he spent one night in the week with Teresa and one night at the weekend with her initially. And they both agreed they would try to work on increasing that time with their children and then review in 6 months' time. And as a consequence of these changing arrangements, they agreed that no child maintenance would be payable either way. So in conclusion, overall, it was a very, very much better outcome for those of you who are litigators and will know what can happen when you try and enforce a child arrangements order, a very much better outcome for the children than a contested court hearing would have produced. That's my story, Michael.
Oh, Alison, thank you very much. I sense that that's probably that the procedures in England and Wales are unique. I don't know, there may be other jurisdictions who have tried that, but the idea of truly, we say in our work how important it is to recognize the needs of the parties who are not at the table. Usually we're talking about children. But this really gets at that by inviting the children to be at the table if they're interested. Yeah, it's quite interesting, unique.
Well, I'd be interested to know, Michael, actually, whether how unique it is and how it is, how this happens in some of the other jurisdictions that are represented today. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you. Thanks, Alison. So we're going to come to you, Caitlin, if you would please. You're going to talk about arbitration, I believe.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much to the panel. It's lovely to hear everybody's stories. Yes, although I'm a mediator and various other hats that Michael has mentioned, I thought I might bring an arbitration angle or arbitration story to the table. Arbitration has been around in England and Wales for a while. It's been around a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. We have those who, under our rules in England, you can have an arbitrator on children matters or an arbitrator on financial matters. And I suppose it's fair to say before the pandemic, it was perhaps slightly the weird kid in the corner. There weren't many arbitrations going on. The sort of mainstream were court processes to sort out issues between couples or mediation, and some collaborative process as well, but sort of court process and mediation. And that was great because I'm a mediator too, and I strongly believe that when mediation is the right process for people, it really, really helps families sort their problems. What I really noticed, so part of my story about the pandemic, is that the stories of struggles and hope was the title of the book. And part of the stories of struggles were that, as others have highlighted, Sarah and Alison too, people's struggles were in many respects a lot more extreme, a lot more intense. People were at home, actually under the same roof. We've got a thunderstorm going on here. That wasn't for dramatic effect. If you heard a clap of thunder, it was an actual clap of thunder. That people actually were in a very intense situation, were actually in the same household, and disputes were quite very intense. And what I noticed as an arbitrator is that actually during the pandemic, arbitration rose in popularity, and we saw more and more people. Maybe, I think perhaps because of the extremity of the circumstances and the intensity of the disputes, finding it harder to use mediation to solve the problems. And when mediation was used, it was still extremely successful. And I pick up on Alison's point about being able to hear the voice of the child can be really useful in mediation in England and Wales. But what I saw, and I'll tell you a particular story in a minute, is that the option of arbitration, which is effectively a private court process, instead of going through the government court process, you instruct an arbitrator as a binding process to sort out a dispute between a couple. And so effectively it's private judging. And that there was, interestingly, a rise of arbitration in England and Wales. And I think part of that was for the reason I'll describe in a story, which is based on an amalgamation of stories, obviously in the interest of confidentiality. But I have a couple, let's call them John and Sarah, who approached me, or their solicitors approached me actually as an arbitrator and said, we need your help, Caitlin. We need to find a way of solving a problem, which is a financial problem for a couple who are separating. And this couple had been separated a while and they'd had a massive range of issues. And to be fair to them, they had solved some issues in mediation prior to the pandemic. And to be very fair to this couple, they'd actually been to court on some aspects and sorted some aspects out through a court process. But right then, in the moment of the struggles of the pandemic and the intensity of still being under the same roof and everything else that went along with it, neither of them could face either of those processes again. It was really interesting that they'd actually tried mediation again, but the extent of the struggles and the extent of the intensity had made that extremely difficult for it to be successful. And so in discussion with the solicitors and the clients, they entered into arbitration to resolve the remaining financial aspects. And again, in discussion with the clients and in discussion with the solicitors, what we tried to do was to make sure that, unlike in a government court process where time constraints are very limited, totally understandably in the court processes, people are doing the staff and the judges are doing their best. But we tried really hard in the arbitration process to give space and time for both parties to be listened, using a phrase that I think Sarah used as well, actually, in relation to her client and contact. Space and time for the people to be listened instead of piling immediately in with lots and lots of decisions, which is what often happens in a time-constrained court process. And so I'm not pretending by any stretch of the imagination it was a mediation. It was not. I was the arbitrator and I was there to listen, take into account all the factors and make decisions, which is what I did. But it was very interesting to me that what that couple were seeking to deal with the extremity of their dispute in a very intense time was a slightly different process that would actually impose an outcome, because they tried other ways of doing this voluntarily and couldn't. So I suppose the story of hope from that for me was the rise of another process, another option for couples, and the ability with Zoom and good discussions between clients and solicitors and a willingness to try and adapt to fit the needs of the particular client, rather than saying this is our process, you must fit in with us. That actually there was a story of hope there that I hope we can take forward from the pandemic to add it as another tool in our toolbox to fundamentally what we're trying to do is help families here to get out of conflict into a better place. So that's my slightly different story, Michael.
Thank you, Caitlin. It is a different story. And and yet it really points out exactly what you said. And that's what I wanted to just honor in a brief comment. That when people in conflict have enough information about themselves and about the processes, we can trust them to choose what approach makes the most sense for them. And that's exactly what that couple did. They chose a process that they believed was going to help them, that was going to benefit them and their family. Yeah, it's an excellent story, extraordinary, and it is a very hopeful one, for sure.
Yeah, I think the important thing for that family, for me, was that they weren't shoehorned into one particular process on the agenda of a lawyer, or
Right.
just assuming there was only one way to do it, whatever that one way was. That was the most important thing for me, I found.
Yep. Thank you for that. Thanks very much. All right, we're going to come to you, Dina Labrozzi, if you would, please.
Yes, thanks. First, a word of thanking, really, because I feel honored to be present in this seminar. Okay, let's go right into the stories. I've been thinking of a scenario, a paradigmatic situation that could illustrate some key points. And I couldn't find one. I thought of two, really. As a clinical psychologist, this is my first work. As a psychologist, I witnessed an increase in the number of requests for help, not really during last year's first wave of a pandemic, but last winter. It was as if in the aftermath of the second wave, people crumbled down. They started asking for help. I have to tell you that last year, several psychological services were provided, also pro bono for unserved populations. But what we could witness is that beginning last winter, it's as if people lost energies and hope. They started asking more and more for consultations, privately or also in public health services. So as a psychologist, I tell you that I started overworking, trying to understand how to offer support to people, how to promote their resilience. And now a couple of stories. This week, two different people called me. One yesterday, she called me, she's a lawyer. She called me and said, please, I need help, not for myself, but for a couple. They came to see me because they are issuing a file for divorce, but they sometimes want to split up. The very next day, call me and say, no, we're gonna stay together, we're gonna stick together. And then again, the day after, they will ask for getting divorced. Since there is a young child, I want them to be clear, to focus on what really they want to do before going any further on. And I'm going to see this family tomorrow. And a couple of days ago, I got a phone call from a woman in her 60s. She needs to ask for some ideas. Basically, she needed to be heard. And like you would say, Michael, she needed to tell her story. Her daughter experienced a very bad time during last winter, so last February, March. And so she called her lawyer and asked to file for, to issue for a divorce. And her lawyer directly wrote down a very direct letter without any previous notice to her husband. So the woman who is telling the story is the wife's mother, and she took a strong stand in favor of her daughter. And the same happened with the husband's family. Parents from the original families usually are strong supporters of their children. So somehow also the families, the original families, enter the conflict. What came up is that these two people, the wife and the husband, seem that they are starting dating together, but in a hidden way, because the conflict that they arose was so high that they are dating in a very hidden way because they don't know how to handle all the mess that came up. So very similar context, young children, a tough context because pandemic hit very hardly people, and thanks to the book, I know that similarities really could be found everywhere. Financial strain, uncertainties about the future, a lot of conflict within family on how to manage internet school time. a very different way to answer. And the difference started from the lawyers in the cases I brought about.
Right.
I want to stop here. Thanks.
Grazie mille.
Prego.
Thank you, Dina. Yeah, the stories that we're hearing, we're going to talk a little bit when we get to the general conversation. And you point out, Dina, there are clear differences, and also the thread of similarity runs right through them, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. Thank you again. We'll come to you, please, Jillian Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, wherever you are, time of the day. And thank you, Michael, and thank you for my fellow panelists. I am really honored to be here. My story is a bit different because I wear two hats. One, in my present position, I'm a school principal, school administrator. But I wanted to talk about how I first got into family mediation, because it's a very different story. My friend approached me and asked me if I will assist her with a family matter, because she and her husband were going through a divorce. And back in the day, 2007, they had video conferencing, because we are Trinidad Republic, Trinidad and Tobago. So it was a high court matter. It was in Trinidad and we lived in Tobago. So she needed a third party. And she knew that I was doing some studies. I had done 40 contact hours, for mediation. And she thought I could assist. So I agreed, being my good friend of many years. Unknown to her husband that I had that experience, we met at a restaurant, we had a meal. He brought his friend and I was there to represent my friend as a neutral party. And we sat down and we had to divide all the assets and come up with a solution that will be presented to court. Well, needless to say, she got a very good deal because I was a friend and I had previous experience with mediation, thanks to Michael. I had done some training with Michael. Fast forward to today, I find myself as a school administrator, often in conflict with teachers and parents. Up to the last week of school, I live about 30 minutes drive from where my school is, and the parent was angry because of the grade her child got. The teacher reached out to me through email. I didn't really check my email. I just decided it's a pandemic. I'm going to take a long drive to get to my school. I'm going to enjoy the scenery. So when I got to school, I saw 6 missed calls. And I was like, this must be serious. When I contacted the teacher, she told me that this parent was angry because of the grade her child got. And the parent is threatening to take the child out of the school. And I was like, no, we can't do that because that parent has 3 children, different levels at the school. So I'm saying, okay, we have to do some mediation here. And I'm laughing to myself because I'm like, this is the last day of school. I thought I was going to have a nice, easy drive, a nice final day of school. So as being a school administrator, several times I have to pull out the mediation hat and be the mediator and then be the administrator. So in this final day of school, I decided, okay, I will be the mediator. So I called the parent, spoke to the parent, called the teacher. And then I used the hierarchy of the school. So I got the vice principal, or we call senior teacher. And we sat down and we came up with a solution. But the bottom line was, it was the pandemic to blame. The internet connection was bad. Assignments were not delivered due. So my experience with conflict as a mediator can go from court annex mediation to parent, teacher, school environment. So my experiences are varied, but I really do think that because of the steps in mediation that we have to go through, and the relationship we try to build to maintain a solid foundation at schools, that mediation play a very important part, because in the first instance, my friend knew me based on my experience as a mediator and as a friend to seek her best interests. And at the school, I have to play the role of mediator to keep the students happy, keep the parents happy, and also keep the teachers happy. So that's my contribution for today.
Thank you very much. One of the things that it points out that isn't often talked about enough, and that is that children who have to be schooled at home because of the pandemic, if they have access to the technology, reliable technology, it makes a huge difference in their progress in school as compared to kids who either don't have their own computer at home or who lack the same sort of bandwidth that's necessary. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Marianne, please.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's been a pleasure to hear the similarities, these threads through our professions, and it's just lovely and heartwarming to see. I'm speaking to you from Canada, and I thought I would be amiss if I didn't acknowledge that us as Canadians and as mediators, and many of us consider ourselves peacemakers, the magnitude of the neglect that our government, and prior to that the Catholic Church, had impacted the lives of Indigenous children through, and we've been learning about this through the unmarked graves that have been found. And I know this is an international story, so I'm mentioning it in the context of mediation to let you know, as a mediator community, that we have a focus on Indigenous approaches to alternative dispute resolution, and very well developed processes, especially in the child protection mediation field, to respond to the needs of Indigenous persons and have a reflective and adaptive and creative approach to mediation within all Canadians across cultures and our intersectionality. So that's a big piece of what where I'm talking from. And I thought about that creativity, and how mediation allows for positions of creativity to come forward, and a lot of my colleagues have talked about this, new way to look at things and to examine a problem from a state of what does the family need? And I thought I'd tell you a little short story about, and this too is amalgamated through some cases that I've done recently. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about Sophia and George. They've been married for about 18 years, and they live in within about 2 hours distance in traffic from Toronto, Ontario, which is the largest city in Canada. And they have 3 children, a 16-year-old son and twins, Sydney and Simon. Their 16-year-old is Andrew. And George has his own business, so he's a self-employed person. He runs a video drone operator. That seems to be a big business here in Canada recently, and hasn't been as affected, luckily, by COVID. And Sophia runs a home daycare in her house. And she had always raised her children at home, and she added children and has a professional daycare that's licensed in the basement of her home. George, found a new partner. The children are angry with him for finding a new partner, and the marriage has broken down. One of the biggest challenges for them is this home business. So, George earns about $56,000 Canadian per year, and Mom Sophia earns about $35,000. And this is modest income for the Greater Toronto area in Canada. And their home, all of a sudden, what has happened in Toronto and the surrounding area, 2, 3, 4 hours away, is the housing prices have skyrocketed. So they bought their home for a very reasonable $350,000 about 8 years ago. And now this house has a value of $750,000. Now, the laws with qualifying for a mortgage in Canada and Ontario are very strict. And so mom is not able to qualify for a mortgage on her own, and she's going to lose her business. And we had to talk through all of these things. What is going to happen? You know, all of a sudden she goes from having a fairly good income, or one at least that helps the family, to having zero income if they have to leave the house. Neither person can get back on the property ladder. And in our area, falling off the property ladder is one of those things a lot of families want to avoid. So we came up with a creative solution that worked for them. And lawyers, every case in Ontario, you're encouraged to get independent legal advice, and many people do get independent legal advice. And we find some varying levels of support around these sort of creative options. So you have to be very careful working alongside the legal field to make sure you paper these things correctly so that the family can actually achieve what it is they want to achieve. And so they decided, yeah, we both want to keep owning this home. There's a lot of discord and things they were working through. There was counseling for the children to come to grips with their father's infidelity and anger towards them. And they decided, Sophia and George, that they would maintain this house together, that they would continue on, and they would, based on the ages of the children, they sort of anticipated they needed maybe another 5 or 6 years until the twins were sort of launched and knew which post-secondary school they were going to go to. So they deferred the sale. And I think that, maybe 2-3 years ago, when we thought about that option pre-COVID, lawyers would give me a very hard time and really not love this idea. After all, they're separating, there's discord. How can you expect them to be property owners together? Well, when we looked at the needs of the family, this option actually achieved everything that they needed to. The business was maintained, the children were in a stable, rooted environment, and they were both able to stay on the property ladder with a very clear, distinct set path on how to deal with the sale of the home, and lots of rewrites and revisions on that. So that's my short story from Canada to share with you the creativity and the brave choices I think that all of our mediation clients make. Coming to mediation, I think, some of you talked too about the fact that mediation is actually not this natural response. Sarah had started with her friend Maureen, who we all think, oh, if we were in mediation, or if we had a conflict ourselves, what would we do? It's actually not a natural response. And so I approach every client with admiration for their bravery and their courage in order to come together and listen to each other. And I hope that, and I know that all of us try our best to do that. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Marianne. Thank you. What's intriguing about your story, I was thinking about it, is, when I first began law practice and then mediation, joint custody, the idea of even calling it joint custody was quite rare. And then we moved from joint custody to shared parenting. Well, if parents can figure out how to share the parenting responsibilities for their children, surely they could figure out how to share the responsibility for a piece of real estate. It's just sort of an interesting flow from one to the other. Yeah. That's occurring to me. Great, thanks. So what I want to do next is first turn to thank all of the 6 of you, and turn to each of you. You've heard what each other has said, and maybe you have a comment that you would like to make, or a question that you would like to ask of one of your colleagues on the panel. So let me start with there before I enter into it with any further comments or questions.
I just wanted to say, if I may, Michael, was just to pick up on what Marianne just said, which is, I too think that for clients choosing mediation, it's a very brave choice. I think that anybody going through a separation, what we're actually doing with mediation often and in other methods is you're asking people to trust each other enough to actually have a dialogue, just at the time when trust is at a premium, often for a variety of different reasons. And I think that's one of the reasons why mediation can be so powerful if we can help clients, and if clients feel able to put themselves through that very difficult initial steps, particularly because it starts to rebuild elements of trust, and also, even if not huge amounts of trust, elements ability to communicate. So yeah, that really resonated with me, Marianne.
And the ability to make decisions for themselves, even if the decision is to say, Caitlin, we would like you to make that choice for us. We'd like you to hear us. We'd like you to think about what we're saying, what we're concerned about, and help us by offering an opinion and make a decision for us. Sure. Anyone else? Yeah, please go ahead, Alison.
So I actually have two questions. The first, I suppose, is following on from my story with you, Michael, and the conversation we had about it being unique to involve children in mediation. So I'd be really interested to hear from the other panelists to what extent that's the case in your jurisdictions. And if I may, my other second question is, we've just very recently here had a report of the Civil Justice Council mandating compulsory mediation in civil cases, so not family cases, but civil cases, which is new. And so I'd also be interested to hear to what extent you have compulsory mediation in your jurisdiction. So two totally different questions.
Let's start with the children first, because it would be interesting to hear how children are involved. I see your hand, Jillian. Thank you. Because I was thinking, among other things, about are children involved when parents and teachers have dispute? You know, do we include children's voices in that? And anyway, and then Sarah, I see your hand up as well. Thank you. So go ahead, please, Jillian, your thoughts.
Alison, I knew the first question would have been something that involved me. I don't know why. But what I've had two experiences that stood out with me. And I'll go to the furthest one. In my previous school, where I was what we call the vice principal, it was a small compound and there was always some interacting and children getting into conflict. And what we actually did, I approached the principal and we had some peer mediation sessions, actually. And we taught the children basic skills. And we had what we call a student council. So these children, which is at the primary level, so the children who were from 11 to 9 were given some, we delegated them to them some form of responsibility to help. Because in the setting of the school, sometimes teachers are on the lunch break, they have the time off. And we actually saw how effective it was because we taught the children about speaking out. What is the problem? So you will literally see the senior students holding the children apart. What is the problem? Did you do this? Did you say that? Tell him sorry. He did not like that. Kind of restorative justice. In a quick, after the first term, they got to understand and respect each other because of that. People were amazed that the space that the children had to use was so small. And yet they never really had what we call school fights. Because we taught them to respect each other and to listen to the other person. Why am I upset? You have offended me, and then I must turn and say I'm sorry. All right, so we had that in a school council kind of way, and it really worked effectively. Now, you asked about bringing children into a mediation session. In Trinidad and Tobago, at one point when we had a more vibrant outreach program, because of the pandemic, in the last 2 or 3 years, we haven't really done symposium the way we'd have done it. At the high school level, they taught one organizer. She did peer mediation for high school children, where she would go in school and actually teach them how to get along, how to go to the principal or go to a teacher to get along. So it took some external forces to come in, plan a program, present it, and for the children to adapt. In the general school, you ask a question, how do you bring in children into a mediation session? Of course, you must bring children like to know that things are working in their favor, and they like to know that their parents are involved.
Right.
So I had a case where there was this little boy who just been so naughty, and I couldn't understand why is he so naughty. But his thing was, the glamour was when his parents were brought together because they were separated, separate homes. But the glamour was coming to school, I could behave naughty because I'll bring my parents together. So when I'm listening to you saying that maybe it's a different concept, that at this point where we're trying to decide who the child will go or stay with, and I'm trying to understand what exactly your program is, because you say the children have to have a voice in the mediation. Exactly what voice? What is it? What is the tone for? What is it? You set in the tone by the children speaking out. What exactly is the mediator looking for, or the settlement will be involved?
So, Alison, if you want to respond to that, and also there was a question related to that, having to do with whether children are included when it's an arbitration as distinct from a mediation. And then I want to make sure that we leave enough time, Sarah, for your question or comment as well, because we're running close to the bone in terms of our time.
Yeah, I'll be very quick then. So how we involve children in mediation in England and Wales is that we have to be, as a mediator, have to be mediating with the parents initially. And then we'll talk with the parents about how the children should be able to have someone listen to their views, to have a voice. And then it's a voluntary process, so if the children would like to speak with me, and I'm trained especially to be able to do that, then I will invite them to come and meet with me. And there are some ground rules around that, i.e. that what they say to me is confidential. Unless there are safeguarding concerns, then they can talk to me freely, and I'm not going to report that back to anybody. But generally, if children want to speak with me, it's because they have got a message they want me to deliver to their parents. And then I agree with them at the end of that conversation exactly what they are comfortable with me sharing with their parents and in what way, and then meet with their parents afterwards to communicate that message. And that very often can help the parents then to work out what those particular issues are and how to resolve them. So in the little story that I explained, just hearing from the children independently, speaking to a third party, to someone who don't have an agenda, unlike each of their parents who clearly do, it enables them to have someone else communicate their views independently and within a safe environment. So that's how it works. And in my experience so far, the children's views have largely been taken on board by their parents. It obviously depends how old they are and how strongly those views are held. And as I say, it's not their responsibility to make decisions. That's obviously really important. I talk about that with the parents before meeting with them. So I hope that helps explain a little bit about how it works.
That works. Thank you very much.
Good. Thanks very much. And Alison, one quick thing, but because Sarah, I really do want to hear from you. Does the same sort of arrangement apply when you do a parenting arbitration?
No, it doesn't currently. And in fact, having just qualified as a children arbitrator myself, that was the question that I asked, and I can see as we develop the way that we resolve disputes like this, actually enabling the children to come and talk to an arbitrator in the same way they could come and talk to me as a mediator, and sometimes we'll talk to a judge, but not always. That could be really helpful, but I think the arbitration training at the moment doesn't accommodate the skill set that you need to be able to have a conversation safely with children in that way. I think if you're a mediator, that helps, and if you've done the specialist training to be able to meet the children in mediation, that helps. So yeah, it's work in progress, that, I think. So no, we don't hear the children's views in arbitration in the same way, is a short answer.
But thanks. No, that's very clear. Thank you. Sarah, you've been hugely patient.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd just like to share the children experience from Kenya. So what I know is that in matters of custody and maintenance, and there's a lot of emphasis on, focusing on the well-being of the child and the age of the child. So sometimes you would have perhaps, one of the parents say, bring in the child so the child can be able to say what they want. But I'm not sure that we mediators actively, seek the children to come in and, to listen to what is the children's voice. When it comes to the question about mandatory mediation, yes, we do have that as well. And we have the matters that are in court, which are screened and go for mediation. And we also have, the mediator's report. And if the mediator files a non-compliance report indicating that either one of the parties or both of the parties are not willing to engage in mediation, then normally there are certain sanctions which fall on the party that is not cooperating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really interesting.
I'm so glad we waited. Thank you so much, Sarah. We are really at the end of our time, which has just been extraordinary, a gift to me and to everyone who's watching this to be able to be part of this group. I just will say a couple of last words. We hope that this has been useful to those of you who watch. We hope very much that you will buy a book. In fact, I've been encouraging people who have the financial resources to do so to buy a second copy and donate it to a library or social service organization. And as I say, some links to the Amazon website where you can purchase either digital or print are in the chat. Lastly, I want to say thanks to Kate Ems, who has shepherded us throughout, both with all of her organizational skills and today managing the tech. To you, Kate, and to Mills and Reed, thank you very much. And to Sarah and Allison and Caitlin and Dina and Jillian and Marianne, my deepest thanks for a remarkable hour together. Thank you.